Welcome to the TechFace podcast. We at TechFace are all about connecting female tech communities with companies to support their members finding a meaningful career in tech. In this podcast, we interview women who have a meaningful career in tech to inspire your own journey. Let's listen to our next guest on this episode. Today, we welcome Doro. Doro and we have met through a mutual friend, Marisa. Actually, she connected us and thought I should definitely talk to Doro. And she was absolutely right, because Doro has a fantastic and amazing career and is also working in a very interesting area, in the ethical area, which is quite important in the tech industry as well. But before going into too much details, I would like you to introduce yourself first.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me in the first place. It's an honor to be featuring in that podcast. So, yes, my name is Doro, or full name Dorothea Bauer. I work and live in Zurich, and I have my own consulting company. And I have started that business about 5 years ago. And it's not easy to find the perfect label for what I'm doing. I'm basically changing it every few months because I'm very interdisciplinary, or even some people say transdisciplinary in what I do, and I work across industries. So I think the least common denominator for what I do could be summarized by calling myself an independent ethics expert. I could also say I'm an ethics consultant. But no matter what label I choose, what's important is what I actually do. And in my everyday life, I advise businesses, and I have different hats. On the one hand, an important part of my business relates to advising mostly companies from the financial industry, like pension funds, asset managers, and banks, on questions related to sustainable finance, but not from a financial performance point of view, more from like a value point of view, like helping them to figure out what they mean by sustainability, why it matters to them, why they want to do it or why they do not want to do it, etc. On the other hand, I have become quite deeply immersed in the field of AI and ethics in the past 2 years, and I'm very active on Twitter with these topics. I'm also lecturing on AI and ethics at the Hochschule für Wirtschaft Zürich, HWZ, and I'm also giving keynotes, for example, on facial recognition and ethics. And I have also started to collaborate in international networks, for example, the Women in AI Ethics Initiative. More recently, I have collaborated on developing an audit system for contact tracing, which is a very hot topic due to the pandemic and which entails a lot of ethical questions, mainly but not exclusively relating to privacy. So no matter what I do in my work, I often act as a sparring partner for companies or for students. My role is to challenge them, and I make them think about ethical issues that they might have ignored so far. So I basically force them to also develop language or vocabulary for ethical questions, because often in business there is something like moral muteness. You don't like to talk about ethics in business. It's kind of embarrassing. You're the softie and you're like considered emotional in the worst case. So, but nevertheless, ethical issues exist. And even if we talk about human resources instead of employees, doesn't make go ethics away if we commodify people by calling them human resources. We'll still deal with humans. So on the one hand, my role is to help people develop a vocabulary for ethics and to find out, what values they share and where they differ, and to overcome the emotional distance or the moral distance to ethics. So all in tech industry, I think language is very important. There's all that talk about code, about technical aspects, and all this might suggest that there is no room for moral judgment, that everything is determined by the programs, but it is in fact always humans that create the technology, and as such we are responsible for the tech we create. So we cannot hide behind jargon, and so one of my main tasks is, as I said, to raise awareness for our power over and our responsibility for technology, and to show where human judgment plays a role, and that there are far less inevitabilities or inherent necessities than we might think.
I think this is a very important topic, ethics in technology, because I feel like it's not so present. So it is quite important that there is these voices who put up their finger and say, hey, stop, are we really doing an ethical thing with the technology here or not? And I fully agree, and I'm happy to hear that we have these voices found with you as well. How long have you really been like focusing more on the tech side? Is this something that you had from the beginning when you went into this area of ethics, or was that something that developed over time?
No, actually, it developed over time because my origins are in business ethics,
Mm-hmm.
and this came from studying business administration in my undergraduate studies, which I found quite boring, if I may say. So, from business administration, I changed to international relations in my master's degree. In order to get a more political view on things. And after graduating from university, I kind of found that I needed to combine a critical perspective on business, and I ended up doing a PhD on business ethics. So a lot of issues that we discuss in the tech industry are not new. They're like genuinely business ethical issues that all other companies face as well. For example, the legitimacy of a business model. Is it legitimate to earn money the way you do? You know, who are your stakeholders? Do you involve your stakeholders, etc.? So sometimes I feel that the tech ethics debate is trying to reinvent the wheel when they could in fact benefit from discussions that have been led before in other industries. But of course, tech also poses some very specific new challenges. So anyway, I come from business ethics, and I also used to lecture on environmental ethics, which is interesting because while business ethics helps understand, legitimacy of tech business models, environmental ethics helps you get some insight into things like robot ethics, like robot rights and all these issues, because it involves animal ethics. So for example, how should we treat animals? Do animals have a right in themselves? And so this whole debate links to the more like philosophical, not very applied debate yet of robot ethics. So by combining business ethics and environmental ethics, both helps me understand AI and ethics, like tech ethics. And then, of course, I made an extra effort to really understand the issues, the ethical issues that newly arise only in the tech industry, which relate to, certain conceptions of fairness and bias in code, etc. So these are generally new issues that we need to monitor.
How did you get into this area? Like today you're a consultant, you have your own company and you consult business, but how did you get there? What was your approach?
You mean how I got from like university, where I spent a lot
Yes.
of time even after completing my PhD, into self-employment?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it was kind of I felt like I had hit the famous glass ceiling of careers in academia. When I finished my PhD, I did a European tour across business schools as a lecturer and researcher. I came back to Switzerland, and I wanted to stay in Switzerland for personal reasons, and I just felt that I couldn't make any progress in academia anymore. And I was also frustrated by the slow speed of publication processes in academia. Suddenly, I felt insecure. I didn't really dare to speak out in academia. I don't want to blame anyone but myself. It's most my own responsibility whether I speak out or not. But when I was in academia, I felt like I was insecure because everything that I said, I felt had to be like really ripe for publication in double-blind peer-reviewed journals. And if this is the standard that you set for yourself, you don't say anything anymore. So since I left academia, I feel much more free to speak out and to speak my mind. And the interesting thing is that I also feel much more heard, because when you're in academia, you publish an article every couple of years after a very painful peer review process, and it has an impact factor of whatever, if you're lucky, 1 point something, 2 point something, and that means hardly anyone reads it, let's be honest. Now that I have left academia and I'm open in the free world of social media and Twitter, I feel like I can speak my mind and I'm being heard. And that's amazing. And I don't have these self-imposed restrictions anymore. Of course, I'm careful with what I say. And it's not that I'm just saying things that I don't mean, but it has felt very liberating. And I think leaving academia was based on the insight that I didn't see a future for myself. I didn't see any professor position coming up within reasonable time. I was frustrated by the publication processes, and I just had to liberate myself. And I thought, like, when you're in academia as a non-professor, you're always at a risk because you always need to get funding for your research. So you continually need to apply for funding. And this is quite a precarious existence. So I thought, like, if I'm willing to have a precarious existence, why shouldn't I have it as my own boss rather than being dependent on taxpayers' goodwill or the Swiss National Science Foundation? And that's what made me take this crazy decision to found my own company.
Is there still something you feel like you could take away from your career in academia you reuse today, or you would say, hey, thanks to that, I'm able to do what I do today?
Well, most certainly. I mean, it helps me a lot. First of all, I think it really underlines my credibility. The fact that I have a PhD, the fact that I have academic publications really shows that I have some capabilities of like high level thinking. So this is certainly a foundation on which I build my career now as a consultant. And also, paradoxically, ever since I left academia, I feel much more intrinsically motivated to read academic publications. When I was in academia, it was a pain to read all those publications. And now I'm doing it intrinsically motivated because I'm not restricted anymore and I'm not suffocated by the pressure to publish. So I know that I do have this academic curiosity, but it's only since I left academia that I can kind of follow it and really enjoy it.
What is it, what you love about your job today? Like, is there anything, you mentioned already a couple of things in the last sentences, but maybe you can summarize it. What is it that makes you get up in the morning and go to work?
Well, going to work is like about 5 meters from my bed to my workplace. So that's already one thing that I love about my job. It's a lot of freedom. It's a lot of risk, but a lot of freedom. And what I also like is like intellectual challenges. I'm always intellectually challenged. So I don't have any mundane everyday routine task other than I should be doing my counting, which I don't do often enough. But it's like I really feel appreciated as a sparring partner for companies, but also for students when I lecture at a very demanding level. And there's always something new. There's no such thing as routine. And I feel I can combine all my skills, all my interdisciplinary skills and conceptual and analytical skills at the same time. So this is very rewarding. But this is also what makes it very difficult to describe myself and to find, an appropriate label for myself. But intellectual challenges are like really a daily part of my business, and I enjoy them. Sometimes I suffer from them and think like, oh, come on, I just, I want to have an easy life. But actually, I probably don't want to have an easy life. I'm okay with that.
Yes, once in a while you think like, okay, today I would love to have an easy life and not be challenged at all in any way.
Exactly. It
I
can be
can feel that.
exhausting.
So for me, this is you're one of this person who made her dream come true, because you do what you really love to do and you decide yourself what to do. But I know there are a lot of people out there who would like to be able in this position as well, but they find it hard to put themselves into this position. What would you recommend anyone to find their dream job? It doesn't necessarily need to be being independent like you are, but being able to talk about their job like you are right now.
I mean, if you are independent, this gives you the maximum amount of freedom to stay true to yourself as long as you survive financially by being independent, of course. But I'm aware that not everybody is in a position to take these financial risks, and I wouldn't advise it to everyone. You really need to, have a high frustration tolerance, and you really need to be willing to lower your living standards when needed, or you need to have a sponsor in the background. So if you don't want to be your own boss, or you cannot be your own boss, I suggest you really look at the mindset of people you work with, at the corporate culture. It really needs to align with your personal values. If you feel like you're a very entrepreneurial person, you probably, I mean, I don't want to blame anyone, but you probably wouldn't want to go and work for a pension fund or for a bank, like the more conservative industries or that are heavily regulated, where there is not so much room for entrepreneurial or free spirits. As I said, there might be exceptions, and there's maybe you want to go into fintech. If you're entrepreneurial and you have a passion for finance, maybe fintech is better for you than one of the really big banks. So I really think that you should look at the corporate culture if there is any such thing, and to really have your own values and passions figured out before you apply, in order to make sure that you don't compromise on your authenticity when you enter a job, because then what you do then is you risk lose your integrity. Integrity is like the integration of your personal and your professional values from an ethical point of view. And you don't want to have a job which you spend like a lot of time every day, where you have to follow a different set of values than you would ever choose for yourself in your private life. So integrity is key.
Thanks a lot for sharing this. I fully agree. It's something I see a lot of people not doing today, that just go for any kind of jobs instead thinking first about what do I really want, what do I stand for, what are my values, and then go and search for jobs where there is a fit. And then unfortunately they leave after a year or even less,
Exactly.
feeling
And
very frustrated.
it drains you, because it's every time you have to leave a job because you feel it doesn't correspond to my own values, you don't leave as a winner. There's always a lot of pain involved until you come to the decision. And I'm not saying you should look for a job for a lifetime. Such things don't exist anymore.
Mhm.
But such experiences can be avoided if you are clear about your values. And
Mhm.
but I think that the younger generation, in fact, they're much more clear about their values than we were. They're much more brave in speaking out on what they believe in.
In regards to your specific field of expertise, ethics specifically in technology, where do you see the future there? What do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years?
Well, I think that the field of AI and ethics, or tech and ethics, is heavily dominated now by the US debate, by the big tech companies. And they face some challenges that are very specific to the US, because they happen in a specific regulatory, or rather non-regulated context, and they happen against a specific social background. Not all of these issues are relevant for us. So for example, we have different regulations in Europe, and we don't have these like oligopolies of tech companies in Europe, not the European ones, and the American ones dominate us as well. But also the ethical issues that they face might not be specifically relevant for us, such as this heavy dominance of like racial discrimination in the US doesn't have the same importance in Europe, or certainly not in Switzerland. But still, we also do have issues with discrimination and bias, etc. So I think the US is leading the way in, or like the big tech debate is leading the way in showing issues that might become relevant in one way or the other, also for Europe or specifically for Switzerland. And I think what's important is to see how the different parts of the world, how they shape their AI strategy. And Switzerland is always heavily influenced by the EU, even if we claim to be independent and autonomous. Let's face it, we're just reenacting what the EU does. What's going to happen is that we are going to see a much more heated debate on privacy issues. I think now the pandemic, COVID-19, has really brought privacy concerns to the forefront with all that contact tracing, and the question, can tech be the solution to so many of our most pressing problems, talking about not just coronavirus, but also talking about the role of tech in enabling or hindering sustainability and all these issues. So there will be a really ongoing debate on whether we can resolve many of our pressing problems with technology, or whether we might have to change our lifestyle, whether tech is not the solution, as much as me might hope for that. And so, yeah, I'd say privacy, technological solutionism, as this is like the term for the ideology behind the idea that tech can resolve everything. There will be more issues about applying AI in specific contexts, sensitive contexts like education, where we ask ourselves, would it be okay for us to use AI to monitor students the way China does? Probably not. AI in medicine, how much can we trust algorithms to interpret, for example, scans instead of doctors? Where can we use AI instead of doctors, or how do the two interact? Then also using AI, for example, in public services like the justice system. Will we ever have an AI deciding whether someone should be granted bail, or whether someone is at risk of recidivism, as they have in the US as well? AI also, you could think of any context basically. AI also in marketing, is it legitimate to really combine all the data you have about a person to just to get them the best offer? Is this legitimate use of AI, not just from an ethical point of view, but also in terms of emissions that AI uses in order to be trained? That's one of my favorite pet peeves. I'm sorry, I'm going off. Imagine all the energy that is used to train AI for what I call nonsense, which is a bit disrespectful, but all the AI that's just purely convenience oriented. Do we really need AI to tell me whether I should buy those sneakers rather than the other ones and all that stuff? So I'm very critical of that. So there will be a lot of debate on AI that now are still mostly happening in the US or also in China with their huge surveillance tools, but they will also come to Europe and they're also taking place in Europe already.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, it's amazing how much is happening when I think a lot of people are not even aware that so much AI is already in place in their daily lives. And it's good that we have voices like yours who are able to say, hey, hold on a minute, let's look at it first from a human point of view before we make any technological decision. So thank you very much for sharing all your insights, what you're doing. I'm glad we had you on this podcast. But before we finish, I'd like to have a couple of speed questions and you just answer what's on top of your mind. Who is your favorite female role model?
Okay, it might sound surprising because we're politically not very aligned, but my favorite female role model is Angela Merkel. The way she handles all these debates and all the dilemmas that she finds herself, or like the challenges that she's confronted with, her poised way of arguing rationally in light of highly emotional debates, over the way she handles the coronavirus now. This is really just amazing. I wish I could be as cool, calm, and collected as she is, even though, of course, sometimes I think like, oh, come on, show some emotions, please, because I'm very emotional. But just having this really calm, cool, collected, rational way of arguing is something that I really admire.
What is your most important skill?
Oh, I think it's arguing.
And the last one, what is the best advice you were ever given?
It's not an advice, it's my favorite watchword from philosophy. It's from a man, I have to admit. It's from an old white man. It's from Immanuel Kant, and it's his watchword, sapere aude, have the courage to think for yourself. And that's something I always remember when you feel like suffocated by all those restrictions and all these authorities that are so much smarter than you. Come on, no matter who you're surrounded by, just have the courage to think for yourself.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very good advice to give out to all our listeners. Thanks a lot for being in our podcast and sharing all your wisdom.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Priska.
Thanks for tuning in today and listening to this inspiring talk on TechFace podcast. Want to be the first to know about the next episode or get first-hand access to our events? Join TechFace and sign up today on techface.ch. As a new member, you will get a free career coaching call and will always be the first to know about exciting events, news and insights. We look forward to welcoming you as our valued member.